So what we're going to have a look at is functions on the board. Has anyone ever seen these kind of functions in physics or in maths prior to diploma? Can you please let me know now? Can you say yes or no in the chat? I'm assuming it's probably going to be a no. Yes or no? Maybe not. Thank you, Ben. I'm just waiting for responses for about 3 more people. Lance, yes or no? No. Gwendolyn, Aurelie, Ugo, have you seen these functions before or not? Yes or no, if you just write it in the chat. Yes, thank you, Aurelie. Yes, thank you, Ugo. So what I'm going to explain then is what each of these functions are. So the first function we're going to have a look at, Lance, if you look just towards what I'm doing at the moment, is going to be the sine graph. Now, there's an issue with this graph because the axis is not quite correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write sine and cosine desmos in degrees. And I'm going to ask you to tell me any features you might know about these graphs. So in a moment it's going to be on the screen again. There we go. So we're going to start off with, I think, just a basic sketch, and we're going to ignore what's going on at the screen at the moment. Let's just go into Google and I'm going to draw here. So if we have a graph like this, we can have a function. This is called a sine graph. This is 0 degrees, this is going to be 180 degrees, and this is 360 degrees. Now there's 2 key features, or 3 key features I want to talk about for this graph. The key words we want to talk about today are the period length. No, that's not to do with women. We want to talk about the amplitude. And the last thing we want to talk about is the principal axes. So the period is how long does it take to complete a cycle. So if you go from this point up to its maximum, back down to the original point, down to the minimum, back to its original point, what is the period length going to be? Can anybody tell me what is the period length going to be?
How long?
Yeah. Yeah. So Lance just said to me, how long is it going to be? And that's absolutely right. It's 360. So it takes 90 degrees to get to the top, 90 degrees to get back to the original, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. So the period length is going to be 360 degrees. Can we put on the chat whether we understand that the period is 360? Yes, no, or maybe. Great, thank you everybody. Right, the amplitude is the distance between its central position. Now its central position is going to be where it returns back to normal. So it returns back to normal at these 3 points, and we call this the principal axis. The principal axis is where y is equal to 0, because along every point, if we had to cut the sine graph in half, it would be cut in half here, and this would happen where y is equal to 0 because it's a horizontal line. Last but not least then is our amplitude. Now the amplitude is how far it goes from the principal axis, which happens just to be the x-axis, to the maximum or the minimum. So we need to work out either this jump or this jump. Can we put in the chat what you think the amplitude is going to be? If this number is 1 and this number is -1, what is the amplitude? Put in the chat now, please. And you put on your fingers. Good try. So Lance is giving me a suggestion of 2. That's not quite right. Thank you, Ben. That's a common mistake. The reason why it's not 2, I'm not sure whether anyone else is going to do it in the chat, is because we want to go, the amplitude is just half of it. So it's just going from the principal axis to the maximum, or from the principal axis to the minimum. It's not the whole distance of the graph. So the amplitude is simply going to be 1. And this is called a normal sine graph. This is called a sine graph.
This one, so only one difference.
So the amplitude effectively wants you to ask, how big are these peaks?
Oh.
So that peaks 1, that peaks 1.
Okay.
They just alternate.
Okay,
The maximum difference is 2, but the actual amplitude is 1.
Okay.
So in this part of the course, you are going to have to know features of the sine and the cosine graph. For the more basic questions, you don't need to know that much, but if you really want to get top marks, this does get quite a complicated topic. Now, the cosine graph is a bit different, and in a moment, I'd like you to copy some notes down on these. The cosine graph is going to be the following. Like that. And then it keeps repeating. So what happens with sine and cosine is these can represent things like in physics, waves in physics, sound waves, they just keep repeating forever and ever and ever. So once you've had one period completed, another period will happen again, and another period, etc., etc. So what we're going to have a look at for the cosine graph is, it's exactly the same concept. It goes from 1 to -1. The period again is 360. This time we're going from the max to the normal principal axis, to the min, to the principal axis, and then back up to the max again. People get confused because they think it looks different. It does look different, but when you keep repeating it, it looks the same. What we've done is just shifted it. So all our information here, period, amplitude, and principal axis, is exactly the same for the cosine graph. Those are the 2 beginning sort of introductory activities. Can you spend about 2 to 3 minutes copying that down? Then I'll give you a really sort of basic NYP activity. Then I'll give you a video.
Miss, how long is the for the period and everything?
The period, amplitude, and principal is exactly the same.
Oh, they're the same.
Yeah.
Okay.